You can plant an entire field and still lose it to pests. Or you can plant the wrong way and watch the pests disappear. A narrow strip of soil, not neat rows, not symmetry, just a strange repeating pattern that looks almost chaotic. At first glance it feels like a mistake, but this mistake is exactly what keeps the leaves untouched, the stems intact, and the harvest clean without a single chemical spray. So what's really happening here? Because if pests are everywhere, why do they suddenly fail in this setup? A farmer once noticed something odd. Two patches, same soil, same seeds, same water. One was planted in perfect rows, clean, organized, efficient. The other was messy, intermixed, no clear structure. Weeks later, the difference was brutal. The neat rows were full of holes, leaves eaten, stems damaged, growth stunted. The messy patch almost untouched. At first, it made no sense. Why would disorder outperform precision? And more importantly, was this just luck? But here, where it gets interesting. The messy patch wasn't random at all. It followed a forgotten planting pattern, one that farmers used long before synthetic pesticides existed. A pattern based on relationships, not spacing, not yield optimization. Relationships, because plants don't exist alone. They interact, they signal, they influence what comes near and what stays away. And when you understand those relationships, the entire system starts to behave differently. Think about how pests operate. They don't wander aimlessly. They search for signals, specific smells, shapes, and chemical cues that tell them, food is here. Now imagine a perfectly planted field, one crop in long, uninterrupted rows. To a pest, that's not a field, that's a buffet, no confusion, no resistance, just a clear path forward. So they land and they stay. But what if that signal gets broken? In the forgotten pattern, crops aren't planted in isolation, they're interwoven. Tall plants beside low ones, strong scents next to neutral ones, fast growers mixed with slow ones. From above it looks inefficient, from a pest's perspective it's chaos. They land expecting one plant and encounter another. They follow a scent trail and lose it. They move forward and hit a barrier. And this changes everything, because pests rely on consistency. Remove that consistency and you remove their advantage. But that's not the full story, because it's not just about confusion. It's about cooperation. Some plants actively protect others, not by fighting pests directly but by manipulating the environment around them. For example, certain herbs release strong volatile compounds. To us they smell pleasant. To insects they're overwhelming. They mask the scent of nearby crops, making them effectively invisible. Now add another layer. Some plants attract beneficial insects, predators, tiny hunters that feed on the very pests damaging your crops. So instead of spraying chemicals, the system recruits its own defense. And suddenly the field isn't passive anymore, it's active. So what does this pattern actually look like? Not theory, not concepts, the real structure. Because if this works, you need to see how it's done. Start with your main crop, let's say tomatoes. Instead of planting them in clean rows, you break the pattern. Every few plants you insert something else. Basil, marigold, garlic, not randomly but deliberately spaced. Now the field becomes layered. Tomatoes still grow, but they're no longer exposed. They're embedded, protected. But here's the catch, spacing matters. Too dense and plants compete, too far and the effect weakens, so the pattern repeats. Main crop, right arrow, companion, right arrow, gap, right arrow, variation, right arrow, repeat. Not perfect rows, not chaos either, controlled irregularity. And this is where most people get it wrong. They either overcomplicate it or oversimplify it. They throw plants together randomly and expect results. That doesn't work, because this isn't about mixing plants, it's about designing interactions. Every plant added must serve a purpose, repel, mask, attract, support. If it doesn't do one of these, it's just taking space. But here's the deeper layer, the one most people ignore, soil, because the pattern doesn't just affect pests above ground, it changes what happens below. Different plants release different compounds through their roots. Some improve nutrient availability, others support beneficial microbes, and when these are combined, the soil becomes more resilient, healthier, more rebalanced, so the plants growing in it stronger, less vulnerable, and pests don't just attack plants, they attack weak plants. Now ask yourself this. If a plant is strong, well-fed, and chemically hidden in a diverse system, why would a pest choose it? There are easier targets elsewhere, and that's exactly what happens. The field doesn't become pest-free, that's unrealistic, but it becomes pest-resistant, and that difference matters. But if this works so well, why isn't everyone using it? Simple, it doesn't scale easily. Large industrial farming depends on uniformity, machines need straight lines, harvesting systems require predictability. Chemicals are easier to apply than complexity is to manage, so the system favors simplicity, even if it creates vulnerability. And this is where the trade-off becomes clear. Efficiency versus resilience. Most choose efficiency, but they pay for it later with pesticides, damage, and dependency. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If you're copying industrial patterns on a small scale, you're copying the weaknesses too. Neat rows look good, they feel right, but they expose your crops. The forgotten pattern looks inefficient, but it protects. So the real question is, what are you optimizing for, appearance or survival? Now let's make this practical, because theory without application is useless. If you want to use this pattern, start small. One bed, not your entire field. Pick a main crop. Then choose 2-3 companion plants with clear roles, one to repel, one to attract beneficial insects, one to support soil. Now map the pattern, don't guess, place them intentionally. Then observe, not for days, for weeks. Watch where pests land, where they avoid, where growth improves, because the pattern isn't fixed. And your job isn't to follow a formula, it's to understand the system. But here, where it gets interesting again. Once you see it working, you can't unsee it. You start noticing patterns everywhere. Wild plants growing in clusters, not randomly. Certain combinations repeating. Natural systems rarely grow in straight lines, and there's a reason for that. They've already solved the problem. We just stopped paying attention. So the next time you plant, ask yourself something simple. Are you creating a field, or are you building a system? Because one attracts problems, the other absorbs them. And maybe the biggest shift isn't in the pattern itself, it's in how you think. Stop asking, how do I kill pests? Start asking, why are they succeeding here? Because once you remove the advantage, you don't need to fight them anymore. And that's the part most people miss. This isn't a trick, it's a perspective shift, one that turns control into balance and problems into signals. So try it, not everywhere, not perfectly, just one section. Break the rows, introduce the pattern, watch what changes. Because once you see a plant protected without chemicals, you'll start questioning everything else. And that's where the real shift begins. And when that shift begins, it doesn't stay small. Because the moment one section starts resisting pests, the rest of your field starts to look exposed. Not in theory, visibly. Leaves you thought were normal suddenly look damaged. Growth you accepted as fine now feels weak. So the question changes again. If protection is possible without chemicals, why tolerate the damage at all? Now this is where most people hesitate. They try to copy the pattern exactly. Same plants, same spacing, same layout, and when it doesn't work perfectly, they assume the idea failed. That's a mistake, because this pattern isn't a recipe, it's a principle, and principles adapt. Let's break that illusion. A basil plant next to tomatoes works in one climate. In another, it might do nothing. Why? Because pest types change, soil conditions change, temperature changes, even wind patterns affect how plant signals travel. So if you blindly copy, you're not thinking, you're imitating, and imitation breaks fast. But here's the better approach. Instead of asking, what plants should I use? Ask, what role needs to be filled here? That's a different level of thinking. Because once you identify the role, you can choose any plant that fits it in your environment. Repellent, masking, attractor, soil builder. Now the system becomes flexible, and flexibility is what makes it powerful. But here, where it gets even more interesting. Some of the strongest effects come from combinations people rarely consider. Not just herbs and vegetables, but flowers, weeds, even plants most people remove immediately. Why would a farmer leave weeds in a field? That sounds backward, until you realize some of those weeds act as decoys. They attract pests away from your main crop, so instead of eliminating pests completely, you redirect them, and this changes the game. Because now you're not fighting nature, you're getting it, but that's not the full story, because redirection only works if the system stays balanced. Too many pests and even decoy plants get overwhelmed. Too few beneficial insects and nothing keeps the population in check. So the pattern isn't static, it's dynamic. And that means one thing, you have to pay attention. Here's a simple demonstration you can try. Take 2 identical sections. In one, plant your crop normally. In the other, use the pattern. Add 1 repellent plant every few feet. Insert 1 flowering plant to attract beneficial insects. Leave small gaps for airflow and diversity. Then wait, not a day, not a week, give it time, because systems don't reveal themselves instantly. But when they do, the difference is obvious, not subtle, obvious. And here's the part most people underestimate. Time. Chemical solutions act fast. Spray today, effect tomorrow. This pattern, slower but deeper. Because instead of reacting, it prevents. Instead of controlling symptoms, it reshapes the system. And prevention always looks invisible until you compare it, but let's be honest, there's a trade-off. This method requires thinking, observation, adjustment. You can't just apply it once and forget it, and that's exactly why most people avoid it, because it demands involvement. But here, the flip side. Once it's established, it starts working with you. Less intervention, less damage. Less dependency. So now we're back to the real question. Not does it work, but are you willing to work with it? Because if you're looking for a shortcut, this isn't it. If you're looking for control without understanding, this will frustrate you. But if you're willing to observe, adjust, and learn, this becomes one of the most powerful tools you can use. And there's one more layer most people miss. Scale. People assume this only works in small gardens. That's not true. It just looks different at larger scales. Instead of individual plants, you design zones, strips, patches of diversity within uniformity. Same principle, different execution. So the limitation isn't size, it's design. But here's the uncomfortable truth again. Most modern systems aren't built for resilience. They're built for speed, and speed hides problems until they explode. This pattern does the opposite. It exposes problems early, gives you time to adjust, and keeps them from escalating. So when you step back and look at it, this forgotten pattern isn't really forgotten. It was replaced by something faster, simpler, more scalable, but also more fragile. And now you're standing between two approaches, one that fights constantly, and one that stabilizes quietly, one that depends on inputs, and one that builds interactions. So choose carefully, because the results won't just show in your plants. They'll show in how much effort it takes to keep them alive. Try it on a small section. Break the uniformity. Introduce intentional diversity. Watch closely. Because the moment you see pests hesitate, you'll realize something important. They were never unstoppable. They were just following a system that made it easy for them. And once you stop making it easy, everything changes. So don't aim for perfection. Aim for interaction. Don't chase elimination. Build resistance. And don't copy the pattern blindly. Understand why it works. Because that's the difference between repeating a trick and actually mastering it. And when you finally see a healthy crop sitting untouched while others struggle, you won't need convincing anymore. You'll have proof right in front of you. Now the only question left is what happens when you apply this to everything else you grow. And here's the part most people don't expect. Once you start applying this pattern, failure becomes harder. Not impossible, but harder, because even when something goes wrong, the system absorbs it. A few pests show up, they don't spread as fast. One plant weakens, others compensate. One section struggles, the rest stays stable. That's not luck, that's design. But let's push this further. Because if you stop at pest control, you're missing the bigger advantage. This pattern doesn't just protect, it amplifies, growth improves, flavor deepens, resilience compounds over time. And that raises a new question. If the same space can produce healthier plants, why settle for less? Here, where things get uncomfortable again. Because now it's no longer about technique, it's about mindset. Most people plant with one goal: maximize output as fast as possible. But this pattern forces a different approach. Stabilize the system first, then let output follow. That sounds slower. And in the beginning it is, but over time, it wins every time. But here's the trap. People expect immediate perfection. They try the pattern once, maybe twice, then abandon it when it's not flawless. That's like going to the gym for a week and quitting because you're not strong yet. It's not failure, it's impatience. And this changes everything. Because the real advantage isn't in the pattern itself, it's in consistency. The longer you run this system, the more it improves. Soil gets richer, beneficial insects establish, plant relationships strengthen, and eventually the system starts maintaining itself. Read that again, maintaining itself. That's the point most people never reach because they quit too early. But here, where it gets even more interesting, once your field becomes stable, you can start reducing effort, less watering, less intervention, less correction, because the system isn't constantly breaking anymore, it's holding, and that's rare. Now compare that to the standard approach. Perfect rows, high inputs, constant monitoring, frequent problems. You're not managing a system, you're fighting one, and fighting never ends. So the real advantage isn't just fewer pests, it's less struggle, less reaction, less dependence on fixes, and more time spent actually growing instead of fixing what went wrong. But don't misunderstand this. This is not effortless, it's front-loaded effort. You think more at the beginning so you work less later. Most people do the opposite. They avoid thinking early and pay for it continuously. So let's bring this back to something practical again. If you've already planted in rows, don't rip everything out. That's dumb. Adjust within the system. Add companion plants between rows. Introduce diversity gradually. Break patterns slowly. Because even small disruptions can start shifting behavior. And watch carefully, because the first signs are subtle, not dramatic. You'll notice fewer damaged leaves in certain spots, more insect activity but different types. Growth that feels steadier, that's your signal. The system is starting to respond. And this is where most people make another mistake. They panic when they still see pests. They assume nothing changed. But remember this, the goal isn't zero pests. The goal is control without intervention. If pests exist but don't spread, you're winning. But here's the deeper realization. You stop fearing pests because they're no longer a threat. They're just part of the system, managed, contained, balanced, and that shift, that's powerful, because fear drives bad decisions, overspraying, overcorrecting, overcomplicating. But when you understand what's happening, you act with precision, not panic. Now step back for a second. Look at the bigger picture. This forgotten planting pattern isn't just about crops, it's about how systems work. Diversity creates stability. Uniformity creates vulnerability. That applies everywhere, not just in a garden. And once you see that pattern, you start noticing it in other places too. Monocultures failing, diverse systems adapting, the same principle repeating, again and again. So this isn't just a planting method, it's a way of thinking, designing for resilience instead of control. Building systems instead of forcing outcomes, and letting interactions do the work you used to do manually. So where does that leave you? Not with a perfect blueprint, but with something better. A lens, a way to evaluate every decision you make in your field. Before you plant anything, ask, does this increase diversity or reduce it? Does this strengthen the system or simplify it? Does this make pests' job easier or harder? And if you answer those honestly, you'll start designing differently. And that's where the real transformation happens. Not when you copy the pattern, but when you understand it deeply enough to create your own. So don't chase the exact layout, chase the logic behind it. Don't memorize plant combinations, understand plant roles, don't aim for a perfect field, build a resilient one. Because once you do, you'll notice something strange. Problems stop appearing as often, and when they do, they don't last. And that's the quiet advantage no one talks about. Not dramatic, not flashy, but incredibly effective. So try it, test it, adjust it, break your own assumptions. Because the moment you stop planting for appearance and start planting for interaction, you stop fighting your field and start working with it. And once that happens, you won't go back, because now you've seen what's possible. And ignoring it would make no sense anymore. A clean field looks like control, but the untouched field proves something else entirely. Because what you've seen isn't a trick or a clever planting hack. It's a shift in cause and effect. Most people try to eliminate the problem. This pattern removes the conditions that allow the problem to exist in the first place. And that's a completely different game. Think about it. Pests didn't suddenly become weaker. You did defeat them. You simply stopped making it easy for them to win. And once that advantage disappears, their presence stops mattering. That's the real takeaway. Not which plants to mix, not the exact spacing, not the aesthetic of the pattern, but the principle underneath it. Every system either invites problems or resists them. There's no neutral, and here's the uncomfortable part. Most modern planting methods, especially the ones that look the most organized, are built for convenience, not resilience. They optimize for speed, for machinery, for simplicity, but in doing that, they quietly remove the very complexity that protects the system. So when problems show up, they don't come from nowhere, they come from design. And if the design stays the same, the problems will keep returning, no matter how many times you treat them. That's why this pattern feels so different. Because instead of reacting over and over again, you fix the root cause once, and let the system handle the rest. But don't mistake this for a one-time solution. It's not something you apply and forget, it's something you understand and keep refining. Because every environment is slightly different, every field has its own behavior, and the more you observe, the more precise your system becomes. So the goal isn't perfection, it's awareness, not control, but alignment. And once you reach that point, you stop asking, what should I spray? You start asking, what did I design wrong? That single shift saves more time, more effort, and more crops than any product ever will. So here's the final question. The one that actually matters. Are you trying to manage your field, or are you trying to make it self-managing? Because those two paths lead to completely different outcomes. Try it once, not perfectly, not everywhere. Just enough to see the difference. Break the rows, introduce intention, watch closely, because when you see a system protect itself without chemicals, without constant intervention, without struggle, you don't just learn a method, you see a new standard. And once you see that standard, going back to the old way won't feel efficient anymore. It'll feel unnecessary. So don't chase control, design better conditions, and let the system do what it was always capable of doing. Because in the end, the strongest field isn't the one you protect the most. It's the one that no longer needs protection at all. And if that's possible in one section of your land, what's stopping you from making it the rule instead of the exception?